Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at the Hoka Clifton 9. Been waiting a while for this one, and we're going to compare it to the Hoka Clifton 8 to see what changed. What's wrong with it? Now before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Today we're taking a look at the Hoka Clifton 9. This is one of Hoka's most popular shoes. It's a max cushion neutral daily trainer. It's kind of their flagship premier daily trainer. If you've never tried a Hoka, I think the Clifton is a good place to start. This thing is pretty versatile as well. It works at the faster paces, recovery day, and kind of everything in between. And I would say it's probably one of Hoka's more versatile training options. And if you're like my wife who's on her feet all day at work, the Clifton works well for that as well. So this is a popular shoe, and I'm excited to talk about the updates here. And with regard to the stats, we'll bring in the Hoka Clifton 8 and compare it to the Hoka Clifton 9 to see exactly what changed. The Clifton 9 did go up $5 in price. It now costs $145. However, we get 3 more millimeters of stack height with 32 millimeters in the heel, 27 in the forefoot for a 5 millimeter drop. And even though we increased the stack height by 3 millimeters, we went down in weight. It's kind of a nice trade-off. We lose about 0.2 of an ounce. The Clifton 9 comes in at 8.7 ounces, while the Clifton 8 comes in at 8.9. So a little bit more to the midsole and a little bit with regard to weight. And as a funny side note, the Clifton 9 only has 1 less millimeter of stack height compared to the Ultra Max Cushion Bondi 8. Now, the biggest differences between the two is the Clifton is going to be a full ounce less than the Bondi. It has a less bulky midsole, and the Clifton is going to be a little bit more nimble and versatile when it comes to running. The Bondi has a slightly more dense foam in the midsole, has a bulkier midsole as well. So that's basically what separates them, but it's just, I think, funny and slightly ironic to see the Clifton basically have almost the same stack height as the Hoka Bondi. The Bondi does have, I think, a 4 millimeter drop to make it a little bit more stable, while the Clifton has a 5 millimeter drop, so there's another slight difference there, but nonetheless, it's only 1 millimeter away from the Hoka Bondi 8, which I always thought, again, was one of the thickest running shoes around. Moving on to the upper, we do have an engineered knit material with a slightly synthetic feel to it that does give the upper a little bit more structure compared to last year, which was a little bit more of a fabric-like feel and a little bit more loose. The more I look at this upper, the more interesting it becomes. It's kind of like a knit material that's been woven through this synthetic mesh that's also fused to an engineered mesh on the inside. I will say it's slightly more breathable compared to last year, and I did find it to have more room through the toe box and midfoot, so it is a little bit more accommodating. The Clifton 9 also does come in wide, so if you do want to kind of get that extra room, you can do that as well. The Clifton 9 absolutely fits true to size, even with the extra room through the toe box and midfoot. I will say you do still have that very noticeable arch support sensation like we saw on the Clifton 8, so I would just keep that in mind as well. The tongue also got some solid changes. It has a little bit less cushioning and padding, and this might be big for some people, it's no longer fully gusseted. They opted for the approach where they have a small piece of engineered mesh that basically keeps it locked in on the medial side. You see this with a lot of other Hoka shoes, saves on weight, and I'm sure costs less to produce. For me personally, didn't really notice it. The tongue worked fine. I was happy with the level of padding. However, there is one caveat I want to note about the upper. This section right here towards the top where the eyelets are does come a little bit further closer to your ankle and foot. And if your tongue isn't positioned perfectly, it will cause some minor irritation. So the tongue does a good job of keeping that off your foot/ankle region, but if it's not there, you will notice some irritation. At least for me, I know everyone's foot and ankle is a little bit different, but it is a little bit more aggressive compared to the prior version. So I would also just keep that in mind depending on how wide or big your ankles are. Moving to the back of the shoe, we still have the Elf Air pull tab, which did get slightly larger, and I think this area also has a little bit more padding and cushioning. I'll also say I think that the lockdown has also improved for a couple reasons. First, my heel was able to slide further back into the heel counter itself, giving me a more secure fit. And the type of material they used has a more grippy texture. It's kind of a quilt-like pattern compared to last year where it was this like silky smooth experience, which if you have the wrong kind of sock or this just doesn't fit quite right, your heel had a little bit of slippage sometimes. So I think that has been fixed here. Deeper heel counter, better type of fabric, slightly larger heel counter, and I do appreciate the more room through the upper and midfoot. So I think it's all a positive change. Nothing that massive, still feels like a Hoka, just some minor tweaks with a little bit more spacing, better lockdown in the back of the shoe. And again, my only real qualm here was basically where the eyelets are. I think it's a little bit too aggressive. I wish they pared down kind of like we saw before, but again, the tongue does counteract that. It just has to be in the right spot while you're running. And now for the midsole. It is still compression molded EVA foam, which may be a bummer for some people. However, it has been reformulated to be a little bit lighter and a little bit squishier and have a little bit more energy return. Personally, I was hoping for something like ProFly Plus, a dual density setup, or something just a little bit more creative compared to just compression molded EVA. But with that being said, I quite enjoyed the ride here. It feels very much like a Clifton. I know it's a redesign, but it doesn't feel like a complete paradigm shift. It doesn't feel like an earth-shattering update. It feels like a slightly bouncier, a slightly more energetic Hoka Clifton. It feels very much true to the Hoka Clifton line that we all know and love. I really liked the 8, and the 9 just feels like a small tweak and improvement to that by giving you a little bit more cushioning, a little bit more energy turn, and slightly more pop out of the shoe. Still incredibly versatile, works at the tempo paces if you really want to pick up the pace. I know it's a daily trainer, it's not the fastest shoe around, but I feel like I'm able to kind of run pretty well in this shoe. If you want to use it for recovery day, plenty of cushion here, and it kind of works for everything in between. So all that being said, it does have a different midsole. It's reformulated. It just feels very true to the Hoka Clifton line, just slightly bouncier, a little bit more to the midsole without being too bulky, too cumbersome, just kind of like a minor incremental, soft, bouncy energy turn update. And even though the midsole did get slightly softer, I would still classify it as a relatively stable, neutral shoe. Now, they do make a stability version kind of the Clifton. It's called the Arahi, has a J-frame with dual density setup there, but we'll kind of save that for a whole separate thing. The Clifton 9, relatively stable for a couple of reasons. First, flat waisted geometry through the midfoot, a large surface area to land on, giving you a stable base, and the shoe isn't super flexible. You do get a moderate amount of bend in the toe box, but for the most part, it gives you a rather supportive frame to run on. It also has that early stage meta rocker, which is designed to kind of get you going a little bit faster, so it gives you a very smooth transition. So with all that being said, I'm gonna keep harping on this. It just feels like a slightly bouncier, slightly more energetic Hoka Clifton 8. Moving on to the outsole, we do have a slight change to the lug pattern, and apparently Hoka changed the rubber to be a little bit more durable here on the Clifton 9. As far as the surface area goes, it's about the same. It's pretty darn comparable here. With that flat-waisted geometry, you have a wide base to land on. As far as the traction goes, felt about the same, nothing too crazy, and I was just quite happy with it. Again, feels just very much like a Hoka Clifton. So where does that leave us? Well, the Clifton 9 definitely has some big changes, although these changes aren't monumental in a way that changes the feeling and the direction of the Hoka line itself. I really appreciate the fact that the upper toe box midfoot has a little bit more room to it. It's a little bit more accommodating, slightly more breathable, and the heel counter has a better lockdown since my heel is able to kind of slip a little bit further back into it, and the material isn't as slick and smooth compared to last year. One small caveat with the upper again is that this part with the eyelets come up a little bit further than last year. It's a little bit aggressive, and if the tongue isn't perfectly positioned, you do get a little bit of rubbing. But once the tongue was in position, I got my laces all set, didn't really notice it. Just on occasion when you get your foot into it or aren't quite perfectly locked in, you do have a little bit of irritation. The other thing is it has a noticeable arch support. That's kind of a Hoka thing, so if you're not used to that, keep that in mind. And the midsole, again, slightly softer, slightly bouncier, has a little bit more to it, just feels like a slightly more cushioned Hoka Clifton 8, which I like, and I think that's kind of the direction all these running shoes are going in. Have that early stage meta rocker, rolls you along nicely, kind of retains the versatility of the Hoka Clifton 8, just in a slightly thicker, softer, bouncier package, and just a kind of a small upgrade. I do want them to kind of take the Clifton in a different direction, mainly because it's only a millimeter away from the Bondi. The Bondi is a different experience, has a firmer, heavier midsole. It's a little bit bulkier as well, and I think it'd be kind of fun to have like a super critical bouncy foam here, kind of paired in, almost kind of like a dual density setup like we see with the Mach 5, and the Mach 5 is a more low profile, faster shoe, but I think it would be interesting to see the Clifton kind of get that treatment. But nonetheless, I love the Clifton. It works really well, retains its identity. It's a very popular model. It's just a fun go-to, highly cushioned, neutral daily trainer that works on a wide variety of runs. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.